And welcome back, fourth and long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hes here, back with the last of my Aussie supporter series interview. And today I have a very special guest from Texas, nonetheless, and a very important person in the US AFL over the last year, and that is Mr. James. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well, thanks, Donnie. I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, for those of you that don't know that are watching this gentleman right here did something that I think most of us a year ago would have thought is impossible. And he started his own footy club in the northern part of Dallas, the North Texas Devils, rocking the North Texas gear. That is fantastic, sir. It is so great to finally have a chat with you. I send you my greatest admiration of what you did over this last year. I mean, how crazy has it been going from no footy team in North Texas to having a full squad and making your first nationals this year?
It's certainly been a bit of a journey and a bit of a ride. A lot of hard work from a lot of people. So, I can only sort of claim a little bit of credit because really the credit goes to all the people I've had around me sort of supporting the growth of the club and getting us to where we got to.
Well, definitely from me, and we've gone back and forth. My full support to the NTX Devils. Hopefully, nothing but success. Hopefully, someday you guys can get up here and we can have a kick with you guys very, very soon. But we are here
We'd
to
love that.
talk footy. We are here to talk a little AFL. We're here to talk a little bit about you. So I thought to kind of start off this episode, we'll find out a little bit about who James Henderson is outside of the game of footy.
What would you like to know?
Nah, it's your call on that one. We'll let this you quick bio, how you
Quick
got to
bio.
the States. Up to you.
So I'm originally from Melbourne. Grew up in Melbourne and played footy all my life until I was about 17, 18, and I had a transition for a little while to rugby. Played rugby for about 5 years and then came back to footy. Played at a few local clubs down in Melbourne. And then eventually, I think when 2007, 2005, my company that I was working for relocated me to Sydney. So I played footy in Sydney. Unfortunately, I had a pretty severe injury in about 2009. I had a very severe back injury. And so I sort of gave up footy that season. I was about 28 and decided to get into some coaching and coaching grade at the Balmain at the time. Balmain Dockers, now back to Balmain Tigers, for a couple of years. And then the company I was working for shipped me overseas. So I spent a few years in London and moved over to the States and initially in Los Angeles until I finally found myself in Dallas.
Awesome. That is great. So being an Aussie now here in the States, I mean, it's not always easy to get people to love footy. Footy is such an Aussie game. So what's your favorite thing about the sport of footy?
Where do I even start with that question? For me, I just grew up with it like a lot of Melburnians did. And I think that there's a couple of components for me in terms of the game. It's that how dynamic the game is, how much just of an amalgamation of other sports the game is. You can just take skills from so many different things. The fitness levels required, the agility, the athleticism, the skill level, all these things combined, there's nothing like it. In terms of the sport outside of the game, growing up in Melbourne, I loved the tribalness of it. And I loved, the fact that, so many different suburbs or areas have a footy team, as you well know. And just growing up, it's my grandparents would talk footy, my friends would talk footy, the random people down the street will talk footy. You'd go down the street in Collingwood or Footscray or any of these other areas, and they've got all the signage up in the shops, things like that. So you just feel like you belong to a community. And the way I like to describe it to Americans, being here in Dallas, is kind of like imagine there's a Dallas Cowboys, out in Arlington, but then there's another one in Plano, and another one in Frisco, and another one in Dallas proper, and another one in Fort Worth. And you think about, the tribalism behind the Cowboys, but you multiply that across 10 teams in Victoria or 9 in Melbourne specifically. It's just a sport growing up that just everyone belonged to and everyone sort of had their team and their thing that they got into. So it was, we like to describe it more as a religion down in Melbourne sometimes. And it honestly feels.
I will not disagree with that. With all the discussions that I've had in numerous communications, it is a religion for a lot of footy supporters. So I will not disagree with that. And for some people, that's one of their favorite parts of it. So I'm gonna make you backtrack just the tiniest bit in your mind. Can you remember your earliest footballing memory?
Oh, earliest footballing memory. Um, for me, it has to be just my dad taking me to the footy when I was a kid, and I just sort of have memories. Obviously, it's a winter sport back home, so I have memories of sitting there, absolutely freezing cold. Blankets over the top of us, on North Melbourne scarves on, North Melbourne beanies on. But I think one of the things, and this is kind of a bit of a thing, my dad always used to bring a thermos of tomato soup. That was just our thing for the footy. And still to this day, if I'm sort of feeling unwell, I'm feeling, homesick or anything like that, I'll go and buy myself a can of tomato soup and I'll cook it and I'll just drink that, honestly, and it'll just take me back to the old memories of childhood. So that was one of the things I'd never forget, just sipping tomato soup at the footy as a kid.
That's a fantastic story, and it still keeps you to this day, no matter whether you're in Australia or not. So
Exactly.
you kind of threw it in there a tiny bit, but I gotta ask, just in case somebody didn't catch it, what's your club and how did you come to support them?
So I'm a North Melbourne Kangaroos supporter. I'm a multi-generational Kangaroos. My parents, my grandparents. I don't know how far back it goes, but we've always been Kangaroos fans. For us, it was my siblings. Everyone were all Kangaroos. It was a no-brainer for us to do that. And from the before I can even remember, Kangaroos fan.
That's absolutely fantastic, and I love these stories of when it's the entire family. But it makes me go a little bit, as I know sometimes we have contrary people that decide to choose something different. Was there any thought in your mind or any thought in your siblings' mind of defying the parents and deciding to support another club?
I'll honestly say no, that I never thought of supporting another club. I do have sort of second and third favorite clubs. But I think the moment there is a distinctive moment in my mind where I thought, why am I going for the Kangaroos? Outside of the fact, for a period of time when I was growing up, in that 80s and early 90s, there was a moment where we had a charity day at elementary school or primary school, and all the kids had to come in their football gear, the team they supported. And we all had to bring coins with us, and we'd line up all the coins, and the longest line of coins won a prize. So there was, probably a couple of hundred kids in my elementary school. About 30 of them were Essendon supporters, 30 of them Richmond supporters, 30 of them Collingwood supporters. There was me and one Kangaroos gear. And so even, as hard as we tried to bring all these coins and line them up, there was just me and one kid. And obviously we didn't win that little charity event, but that was the one day that me and this other guy were like, why are we going for this team? Because every other team had more than us. We were the only two Kanga supporters in the whole school.
But in the long run, you have that kinship with that people, and sometimes it's good to support some of the smaller clubs too. I mean, the massive clubs like Richmond and Essendon, they have tons of supporters. It's easy to go for those teams occasionally, especially back some of your times. So, can you remember the first Kangaroos item that you were ever given or bought?
I've always had some gear. I've had, jerseys and beanies and things like that. I can't really remember when I sort of got them. But I do remember the first Kangaroos main item that I bought from, and that was in '96. We won the grand final, and I went to an auction. I think in '96 I was like 14 years old, and I used all of my savings money. My parents topped up the rest of the money to buy a signed Wayne Carey jersey. Still have it home framed on the wall. I actually have 3 or 4 jerseys from that year, which is also centennial year of Aussie rules, all at my parents' house still today. So that was the
Yeah.
thing that I spent the most money on and remember buying as a 14-year-old.
Hard to argue. Wayne Carey is not one of the duck is definitely worth a purchase there. I'm not going to argue with that. So I'm very interested in this one, especially now being here in the States. And it sounds like you've been in here in the States for a little bit. How would you describe your fandom, as I call it, or your support for North Melbourne? Like, do you find a way to watch the games live, or you kind of just keep an eye on them? Like, how would you describe your fandom of the North Melbourne Football Club?
So I'm still an international member of the club. I still purchase that each year. My sort of following of them waned a little bit. When I moved from Melbourne to Sydney, obviously it's a little harder to get to games. I went to more of the Swans games and got to know a couple of Swans players through, friends of mine. So we were sort of supporting the Swans and third teams. They're probably my third team. And so it was a little harder to follow the Roos as closely. And then, as I said, I relocated to London, and I sort of lost touch with footy, to be honest, for a couple of years until I got to the US. So I've been a member throughout that whole period of time. It's only been the last, I'd say, 2.5 years that I really sort of started to get back into it. A little hard to watch at times last year with the performances that they did, but I've obviously got the Watch AFL app, and I always try and watch at least 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 games every weekend or throughout the week, and always like the Roos games were as often as I could. The Roos games are part of that.
All right, that's awesome. And we'll stay in the past just a little bit longer. Can you remember the first Roos game that you ever attended?
The first Roos game. I don't remember the first Roos game, but I sort of remember going to a bunch of games that people don't go to anymore, Waverley, Princes Park, things like that. So I do remember attending games. I remember some of the players that we used to watch, not Roos play. Some of the just that all-time greats, Tony Lockett and Jason Dunstall and, Gary Ablett Sr. and those sort of guys when they were playing as well. So I do have fond memories of watching, those guys run around. And so for me, the best thing I loved was some of the battles that you'd watch with those particular players. And our full back for a period of time was Michael Martin. So I used to just love watching Michael Martin play against, Gary Ablett, that kind of thing. And it was always those full back, full forward battles. Remember that from very young age. Can't remember when, but clear memories.
Awesome. So I love this next question because it's always fun to hear people's opinions on this one. And for me, I've heard it described as trying to picking your favorite child. Is, do you have a favorite player of the past, and do you have a favorite player currently on the Roos list?
Favorite player of the past, I had a couple, but I was always fond of Wayne Swartz. Actually, my supporter jersey always had number 2 on the back, and I had a couple of Wayne Swartz, signatures on different books or different jerseys and things like that. So he was a favorite player for a long, long time. I just liked his work ethic and how he went about the footy. Other players that sort of jumped to mind, I mean, I mentioned Wayne Carey before, but, I loved watching Corey McKernan and him getting loved Dean Laidley, back in the day when now Danny Laidley as he was playing. I loved, a lot of guys from back then. In terms of players today, there's a couple of guys I don't mind watching for a little period there. Jack Zeeble was great to watch. Ben Cunnington, I still love to watch now. I think watching, Jai as he's coming through and sort of finding his feet and aging a little bit, he's been really good to watch. There's a couple of guys that are coming through that I think will be exciting to keep my eye on for the next few years. And as I said, Cunnington and Zeeble winding down towards the end, but some of these younger guys coming through are really great.
Yeah, definitely the North Melbourne is one of those clubs. I will say this. I enjoyed watching their games even at the end of the year. I know last year wasn't the greatest year, but at the end of the year, they were a fun team to watch because they were scrappy. They were in games. They gave everybody headaches. So I'll say this. I think you've got a lot of good things coming to the North Melbourne Football Club, especially their off season. But we'll chat about that in just a little bit. Since you do have some of the memories that you do, and again, being able to watch the Duck in his prime, what's your most memorable moment as a North Melbourne supporter?
It's got to be 96 final, I'd say. I remember being at the grand final with my dad. I think that year we went to every single Melbourne-based game, as well as, we drove up to Sydney for a game as well. But I remember winning that grand final, and the guys behind us were some really tough-looking guys with tats and beard, long beards and all that kind of stuff. And I was there with my dad, my older brother, and myself. And we won the final, and we're jumping around, and tears are coming down our eyes and everything else. And I turned around, and these 2 blokes were, these big, tough-looking guys were also crying. And they just embraced me and embraced my brother, and we're all high-fiving and things like that. So just it's a sort of a footy fandom moment, but seeing the way that the emotion that it brought out in everyone was, for me, just something that I'll never forget. So that's definitely up there.
That's a great one, and that's absolutely fantastic. And it shows you, no matter how tough you look on the outside, you can show emotions when your team does something so fantastic. Now we kind of previewed it just a little bit. What were your thoughts last year on North Melbourne season? Again, unfortunately, a wooden spoon, but like I said, in the last 13, 14 games of the season, you didn't want to face the North Melbourne Kangaroos last year because they were tough. They played you difficult. They played so much better at the end of the year than they did last year. So kind of what were your thoughts on last year?
Yeah, I think I sort of thought they'd probably be wooden spooners going in, just the way that they'd been performing and the list and things that they had. But I mean, the young talent that's starting to come through, some of the young guys that they have been sort of trialing and are starting to find their feet, as I said, I have pretty high hopes for the future. I know that we may get to it as well, but some of the recruitment that they've done, the fact they've got the first draft pick, things like that, I like that North have this really good window right now to turn things around over the next few years. I think changing coaching obviously had a big impact as well, as it always does. Reece Shaw wasn't there for very long, but he had to step away. Noble's sort of a first-time senior coach, came in a bit of a risk on him, and I think he's starting to prove himself. So I enjoyed watching the brand of footy. Sometimes I cringed a little bit, honestly, watching the brand of footy when you compare it to the top clubs. I do think that these young guys and young bodies are going to start to mature a little bit, and the players are going to start to gel and come together. So I think I have pretty high hopes for the future.
Good, very, very good. So, and I'm one of those. I keep an eye on the off season and to see the trades and different things like that, because it's very much the American in me. We love the manager mode where we can move things around. So, have you been keeping an eye on the off season at all for your North Melbourne Roos?
I've kept an eye on it a little bit. I wouldn't say I've followed it super closely this year. There's been a couple of trades in and out. A couple surprised me as well, like Tarrant heading out. That was one that kind of surprised me, but also doesn't surprise me. Hugh Greenwood, I think, was a big coup for the club, to be able to secure him. And I read a couple of articles when that all occurred. And he's an older player. I think he's, 30 now or pretty close. So he's not a super young guy, but he brings a high level of leadership into the club and some skills into the club. And I think Gold Coast, that was an incredible mismanagement of how they let him go, but I'm glad David Noble managed to get in and pick him up, and I can't wait to the draft to come through, see what else we can pick.
The funniest thing, I don't know, did you hear the story of how
Yeah.
Coach Noble found out about Hugh Greenwood being delisted?
Sorry,
Have you heard the story of how Coach Noble found out?
From his wife?
From his wife. Yep, his wife saw it on
I
social
heard that.
media, and I thought that was classic. That a little bit, you can almost, as a North Melbourne Roos fans, you can thank Jamie and Noble's wife for being able to make that particular signing. I think it's an incredible signing, especially with knowing that you're going to have the number 1 overall draft pick, which looks to be in a South Australian, Jason Horne-Francis, who, I mean, a lot of people are comparing him to some of the elite midfielders of the competition currently. So having an experienced Hugh Greenwood stepping in to be able to mentor him, I think is an incredible job for that North Melbourne midfield, which I think was already getting better as this year went on. Now you add 2 really good, a contested ball nut in Hugh Greenwood, and this incredibly talented young kid who is not going to have to perform this year. He's going to have a little bit of help. I think is only going to help North Melbourne. So we'll have to see, can you get the impacts in the back? Like I said, the loss of Tarrant, I think it's going to affect them a little bit, but I think there's still some moving parts there. North's a young list. I think they're going to get better. It'll be fun to watch them over the next couple of years. So
For sure.
I'm one of those. I tell a lot of people I hate saying expectations for the upcoming season, because I think it almost has a negative connotation. Is you expect this to happen. So do you have expectations going into next year? Are you one of those where it's like you want this to happen, but if it doesn't happen, you're not going to be super upset?
Yeah, look, I don't want us to come last again. That would be an expectation, to lift off the bottom of the ladder. I'd like it, and I think it would be, this is just my opinion, I've sort of, but I think it would be a good season if the Kangaroos can lift 4th off the bottom. So sitting in around 13, 12 on the ladder, I think we're a little bit away from cracking the top 8, but hopefully the year after or year after that might be when we get there and start sort of vying for finals again. But I think we're still a few years away from finals. So just getting off that bottom would be good.
Yeah, anything above, if you can get above 15th, if you can get out of that bottom 3, I think is a successful season for North after last year. And again, I said the building blocks are there. If everything if you can replicate last year's last 10 games in the next season, I think you've got a good shot of winning several more footy games. But next year's going to be interesting. Just looking at some of the improvements of the Melbournes, the Western Bulldogs, the Sydneys, the Richmonds. It's going to be a fun season next year, because I think there's going to be a lot of, like, I in a couple of these I've said that I can think of 10 teams right off the top of my head that I think can make finals next year. And there's even a possibility of up to 12. So it's going to be
Right.
fun making the finals next year. So it'll be really interesting to see these teams, like how does Collingwood progress? How does North progress? How does Gold Coast progress? Because they're going to be the spoilers. They're going to be the ones that'll nip a Doggies, a Richmond, a Sydney, a GWS teams. They're going to be those changers.
Mhm.
They may not make the finals, but they're going to be the teams that are going to affect the finals. So that'll be a lot of fun. We kind of discussed this just a tiny bit earlier, and I love this question because it's a lot of fun to hear the answer. You've been over here in the States. We love kind of making moves, making changes. We love like general manager modes in video games, stuff like that. So I love this question is I'm going to install you as the North Melbourne list manager as we speak, but I'm going to do one little funny caveat. All 17 of the other clubs have completely open lists. You can pick up any player, no restrictions, any player. Who is the first player that you bring into the North Melbourne Football Club?
That's a good question. Um, that's a very good question. I think that I'm not going to say a specific player, but I think that there's some incredible young talent coming through the Swans. They had 11 academy players come through this year and start playing around that. And I think some of those guys, they surpassed expectations in the first half of the season for sure. It's what everyone thought. So nabbing a couple of those younger, 22, 23-year-old guys that have some time to mature into a role would be fantastic. I don't think we can talk about all the superstars that are out there, but I don't think getting one or two superstars and pulling them into the team is going to transform our team and take us to the top 8. So for me, it would be as a list manager, really thinking about what the current list looks like and who are some of those up and comers that might have a little more maturity. I think the Kangaroos average age last year was 21 and a half or 22 at one point. So bring in a couple 23, 24, 25-year-olds that have a little more experience and rate up slightly and have them more mature as a group. That's probably what I'd be doing, taking some of the rising stars from other clubs.
Not a bad idea. I think one name that I think would fit really well, and I've kind of and I'll for some of the North Melbourne fans that'll watch this, it'll be an interesting discussion point. Is one that I think would have fit well was Logan McDonald, is the youngster forward who actually I think there was an interesting discussion draft night last year because they took Powell, the midfielder, above Logan McDonald, because I think a lot of Swans fans were shocked when North Melbourne took Powell because that left Logan McDonald on the board for the Swans to draft, which I think kind of shocked me especially. I was not expecting that. I was looking at Denver Granger Barras was a defender who I thought we were going to replace with Alira Lear. And when Logan McDonald was still on the board, a lot of Swans fans went, well, yeah, we've got Buddy, but this is Buddy's, I mean, heir
He's in
apparent.
his twilight.
You hate saying it. He's just heir apparent with Buddy being lower. So that would be somebody I think would fit really well there with you guys for sure. If you wanted a specific name for that. So, all right. So with some of the later questions, again, I like asking fun ones, especially towards the end. So, I know you're now here in the States, but you are in a Melburnian. So I got to ask this question of the Melburnian. The last 2 grand finals have seen outside of Victorian soil, which again, you ask most people, they never would have thought that to ever be. The MCG was where the grand final, it's almost synonymous. So as a Melburnian, there've been discussions now that maybe, again, a 50-year contract. I know, comment section, calm down. It's always funny sometimes they get really when you bring up something that they don't want to have happen. It's always fun. What are your thoughts on is the grand final have to be in Melbourne, or is there any thought process in here that maybe to become a traveling grand final, kind of like the Super Bowl is over here in the States?
Yeah, it's I'm biased as a Melburnian, and having gone to 10 or 12 grand finals in my life, I love that it's at the MCG. I think the MCG is always kind of been the mecca of footy, and I understand people want to maybe break some traditions and things like that, but I think the MCG is kind of the home as to where it's been. I know it's perhaps a tad unfair for some of the away clubs to play, especially if it's a Melbourne club that regularly plays at the MCG. So I sort of see the pros and cons, but for me, it's always been at the MCG. It's always been a day grand final, not an evening grand final. And I personally would love to keep it that way. But I do see, maybe there's a world in which if it's two teams that are non-Melburnian teams that perhaps it could be outside of Melbourne. But I mean, if it's a Melbourne team, I'd love to see it continue to be Melbourne.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. And it's like a little bit like you kind of experienced this year is that late start sometimes can be kind of hard on American fans because at least the 2:30 kick, even in the East Coast, it's a midnight kick, so it's not too bad, not super late. For us here, it's 11:30 for the West Coast, it's 9:30, so it's not too bad. But the Twilight Grand Final and the Brisbane Grand Final, I mean, it's 3 or 4 in the morning, so it's fun. It tests your dedication on are you going to set your alarm? Are you going to nap? Are you going to try to stay up all night? It's the forever US fan question is how do you want to watch the footy? Do you want to nap before or so on and so forth? So I'm one of those.
I think the challenge with it having been in Perth last year and having it, sort of a twilight game, I've got young nieces and nephews, some of them are Kangaroos supporters as well. And, they're not staying up until 10, 11 o'clock at night, to watch the footy, and, they've got to go to bed at whatever time it is. So for me, I think there's probably a lot of young kids, and the young kids is what you want to hook on the game so they can follow it for life. And some of those young kids don't get the opportunity. So that's partly for me, I think a day grand final is better.
Yeah, and I see both arguments. I think for many people, they see the TV ratings and the financial dollars. Unfortunately, it's become such a business that I can kind of understand why some people have looked at the night grand final as being the way of the future. Again, I'm not going to say I'm a traditionalist because tradition, I mean, it's changed many years. I mean, it hasn't always been at the MCG, so we won't go there. So next question for me. I'm an avid supporter of the AFLW game. I think it's very, very important that people support the AFLW game because I think it's getting better and better each and every year. I'm super excited. As a Swans fan, I've signed up for my foundation membership since the Swans start next year. I'm super proud of that. Being an American, I took pride in that. So do you keep an eye on the AFLW? And if you do, kind of what were your thoughts on North Melbourne's season last year?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I watch the occasional AFLW game. I don't follow it like I do the men's game. But I love the fact that it is sort of a semi-pro league now and it's becoming bigger and more professional. I see, some massive advantages to, their AFLW, just a general comment on that. I remember when I was 21, I had a girlfriend who lived out in Berwick and she played for the Berwick team. That was, when was that, like 2? And there wasn't many women playing footy back in 2002. So for her to be playing footy and her friends playing footy, and Berwick's a pretty big club with a great ground out there as well. I think they came that year overall. So I've always been a proponent of the women's game and seeing themselves. I mean, they've got some great talent. I saw they won a few, they lost a few. As I said, didn't follow it quite as closely, but I do follow the North Melbourne women's team on Instagram, and just sort of see some of the updates of what's coming through there. And I think that the women's team in general, or women's footy in general, just brings a whole nother dynamic to the sport. And the way that they go about their game, the way they go about things off field and things like that is different to the men's game. So I do enjoy watching it. Definitely did watch the AFLW final last year, so I'll still pay attention to the finals. And I think each year, what is it now, the 5th year that it's on? Maybe the 6th we're going into. 6th we're going into. So each year it's sort of, I'll be honest, it's piqued my interest a little more and more as the seasons go on. So I'll probably start watching it a little more as well.
If you ever get a chance to check on my channel, I actually had a chat with an AFLW women's player for the North Melbourne Roos, Miss Daisy Bateman, an incredible young lady. If you get a chance to listen to that.
I actually think I did listen to most of that one. So I did catch that. Yeah.
Yeah, incredibly humble. I loved. She was such a fun person to chat with, and so humble. So she was incredibly. So I have a favorite player currently because I had a fun little chat with her. So, all right, I like, again. We'll keep some fun questions here. Is being an American, and you've lived here in the States. Americans, we love to eat when we go to our sporting events. It's more of entertainment more sometimes than the sporting event sometimes. But I want to know, since I plan on eventually getting over to seeing a footy game live, what's your go-to food at the footy?
You've probably got this answer. I think I'm the 18th interview now, so I hope people have got this answer 17 other times, and that's just a meat pie. You can't go wrong without a meat pie at the footy.
It's not as many as I thought. Actually, I was actually kind of surprised. I had one that was actually vegan, so theirs was a bucket of hot chips.
Right.
I've had a few people. I had one. I think she has an issue with wheat, so she couldn't have a meat pie because of the breading. So I was actually a little bit shocked that it wasn't as many meat pies as I thought. But there's been many where the meat
Yeah.
pie was their go-to
I
food,
mean,
which I.
the meat pies at the footy I mean, they're 4 and 20 pies, which you'll get at every service station and everywhere else you want to go, you get a 4 and 20 pie. And usually the footy ones are either way too hot and they'll burn your tongue,
Mhm.
or you but they're frozen still in the middle. So they're not the tastiest pies. But it's just a tradition to go to the footy and have a meat pie. So I actually
Mhm.
took some colleagues of mine from the States to a game, go out and see GWS versus West Coast a number of years ago out at Olympic Park there. And I bought them all meat pies, and they couldn't quite understand what was so great about it, but I was hoeing into them and absolutely loved it.
I know I know the feeling. I actually made meat pies for the grand final here at home, and I thoroughly enjoyed them, and it was a relatively simple recipe. So I've embraced it as much as I can, which is a lot of fun. So I'm going to it. What I keep telling most of my friends is that they're like, you have to have a pie. You have to have a pie. I'm like, a pie and a beer is going to have to be the two things I
Yeah.
definitely get when I get down there. So I know it's been a few years since you've seen a game live or like MCG, anything like that, but when you did go, where was your like ideal place to sit? I'm trying to find out where the best place to sit to watch the footy is.
Yeah, I always liked the second tier at most of the stadiums rather than the bottom tier, and probably somewhere on the wing or on a forward flank or a back or either flank, back forward flank. I like to have that slightly elevated view. I mean, as you know, the ground is gigantic, so being able to have a little bit more of a view as to what's going on. What's amazing about our game is you see what you see on TV, and usually it's following the ball and following the play, perhaps the next play, but watching the guys run around, it might be 100 yards away and getting into position and moving and the off ball type of things that are going on. I love just being able to watch that because that teaches you a lot about the strategy of the game, what people are doing. And so that second tier for me was all one. Sometimes as a kid, we go sit right up in the nosebleeds, and I actually didn't mind that so much as well sometimes because you do get a really good view of the ground. But when you are that high up, I remember my dad and I used to go with our little headphones and listen to the radio commentary because you couldn't always pick up the numbers of the players as they're running around because the stadium's that huge. So yeah, on the wing flank, on the a little bit elevated.
Awesome. And that's one of those things that I'm with my coaching over here is I that second tier is one of those I'm looking forward to just because you don't get the full ground view. So I think that second tier would be absolutely fantastic. As
Mm-hmm.
I've said, this channel is primarily for American sports, NFL, NBA, UFC, different things like that. But occasionally we'll get the American that'll click on some of these videos. What is AFL? What is the North Melbourne Kangaroos? So I thought it a little fun if they got to this point is to give you the opportunity to kind of recruit some new Kangaroos fans. So could you give me your best pitch on why you think an American should be a North Melbourne Kangaroos supporter?
I'll say it this way: everybody loves an underdog, and to my mind, the Kangaroos have always been the underdog. Whether that is some of the lowest membership numbers, whether that's the club that's been touted to go to the Gold Coast, touted to go to Tasmania, whether it's a club that has not financially viable since 1987 until this year. They've hit their 10th year in a row of profit, and so they're finally out of debt. My entire life following the club has been felt like it has been sort of battle after battle, and the Roos are known as the Shinboners. You might know that as their nickname, and the Shinboner spirit is really just a reference, a couple of origins to it, but it's a reference to really being able to sort of pick up your bootstraps and sort of go about your game and not have all the resources, not have everything else to do it. So I'd heard a couple of sort of stories as to where that came from. I'm not sure which one's true, but one I'd heard was it was the meat packing area. They used to get the shins and boil them up and things like that to be able to create their stews and soups. Don't know if that's true, but that's the kind of sort of poor man's mentality, if you will, the club had. So rising up from where we came from and being able to win a premiership in my lifetime in 96 and 99 has just been something to be pretty awe-inspiring. And I think these guys, no matter how hard they're going, how difficult things seem, the Kangaroos always a team is just going to continue to rise up.
Awesome, and a great one. And I agree. This is definitely a team that's on the rise. If you want an underdog type of team, which I think a lot of USA fans surprisingly are underdog fans. I think they would really attach onto it. So my last question that I have in each of this one, and I
Mhm.
love this question because I think it's so much fun for me because you never know what somebody's going to say to this one. What is your favorite game of footy that you've ever seen, whether TV, whether live? It doesn't have to be a Roos game. Favorite game of footy that you have ever seen?
Uh, I would probably say, does it have to be an AFL game or outside of
Nope.
AFL?
You can even say outside AFL.
So
I'm leaving this completely open for you.
I played with the St. Kevin's Old Boys for a period of time when I finished high school, and then I ended up sort of dropping out of the team throughout the year. And the team went on. It was all my high school mates were now playing in the under 19s, and we ended up. I think that was the year I actually went to rugby, and that team ended up winning the final. And watching them win the all the schoolmates has said just getting up and getting over the line was absolutely phenomenal. Half the school was there watching, the old boys sort of out there playing. There was one player, a guy called Eden, and he took one of the biggest all-time specky marks that I've ever seen, and somebody caught it on camera back then. So I'm sure there's photos of that floating around somewhere, but that was one of the greatest things to watch them get up and get over the line, and everyone sort of storm the field and run onto the field and sort of cheer the boys on. So yeah, that for me was one of the most memorable ones.
Awesome. I absolutely love that. And hearing these great stories of the high school footy, like that's cool for me. Like that would have been fascinating to have that ability to play that game in high school. So, well, James, that is it from my questions here. Another fun conversation. I know we've went back and forth this year. I mean, we've chatted a little bit about the NTX Devils, a little bit of footy, everything like that. So it was great to actually have a chance to talk with you. I know via Zoom, but it's to talk to you in person. So I just want to thank you again for everything that
Absolutely.
you've done for NTX and for hopping on here because this has been a blast.
Excellent. No, thank you so much for having me, Donnie. I appreciate it.
Nah, absolutely no problem. We will stay in contact, you and I, sir. Like I said, we'll definitely try to find a way to maybe have the Roosters and the Devils have a nice little battle, and you and I can go mano a mano coaching wise. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
I'm all for it, mate. I'm all for it.
Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, this is actually the end of my supporter series. I hope you enjoyed these chats. Keep an eye out. I think I'm going to have a couple of more chats over the off season before we hit the AFLW, but keep an eye. The AFLW will be coming up soon. I will have round reviews. Keep an eye on that. Thank you for watching. We will be back very soon with more footy talk.